Okay, we're continuing our series on the cosmos, and we're trying to understand how the ancient world viewed their cosmology along with their cosmogony. So we've been reviewing these ideas, taking what Douglas Knight has laid out for us, and we want to move into more of what Horowitz lays out in ancient Mesopotamian cosmology. But as we do that, as we dig into these things to understand their world, how they viewed Middle Earth in relationship to the heavens above and what is below, okay, and how they divide it all out and parse it all out. On top of this idea is cosmic geography in the sense of how they viewed themselves. So it's one thing to look at the whole cosmogony and cosmology and how everything is mapped out mythically, okay, but also and metaphysically, but also how it is illustrated in their own thinking of their own geography. So in this video segment, we wish to view cosmic geography. Now we could go much deeper, how Paul takes this, how Daniel 10 takes this, how different passages in the Bible take this. But before we even delve into those, which we're going to set aside in this series, keeping to our focus on what originally God's intent was for the charter for humanity. Along those lines, we're going to avoid those discussions on like Daniel 10 and Paul's view. Set those aside for a later installment, possibly in another series. And rather, we want to look at exactly how, in this particular segment, how each nation of the major nations, to give a representative view, viewed their cosmology, and then how they mapped that onto their own boundaries, their own borders, and then how Israel might have done the same. And that's the focus of this video. Now we can discuss what's known as cosmic geography. And we can look at this map depicted here, okay, for us. And we have this understanding of the land that's given to Abraham. Genesis 15 and Numbers 34, and then you get into the tribal allotments in the time of Joshua. And so you can compare. The approximate description in Genesis 15 goes from the Euphrates, which is a very, famous river in the ancient world, even mentioned early on in the creation account. And so it's a part of the Fertile Crescent, the major portions of the traffic in the ancient world where all the peoples had to find water to survive. And so then you can see it goes all the way down to Kadesh Barnea, where the Israelites in Numbers chapter 13, 14 were supposed to invade the Promised Land initially after coming out of Egypt at the Brook of Egypt. So it's kind of the border in the southern portion, the Negev, the wilderness down there. There's the Brook of Egypt. And so it's from the river to the river. And this brook is kind of like a dividing line between Egypt and the Promised Land. And so they've left Egypt in the Exodus. And they have this idea of this land. To their west, immediate west, they have the Mediterranean Sea and the sea peoples that come from the Greeks. All this is part of the geography of the day. And then, of course, you have the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea, technically, to their immediate east. But then some of the tribes settle on the Transjordan. You're kind of surrounded, in a sense, on all sides by water. And that's what we're depicting in the cosmology. And therefore, it translates in their geography. So when we, again, see the map of Euphrates down to the Brook of Egypt, and that's the area of the sovereignty of the king of Israel. The primary area is depicted, and aside from portions there in the northwest, for the most part, this follows along with the biblical account where Abraham was prophesied the land, and then the kings end up getting it. We can see here in this map, not all scholars are in agreement here. For instance, David Falk does not find this argument to be convincing, but the Yam Suf is like the end of Egypt And they come through the Yam Suf, they come through the waters of Egypt, and they're out of Egypt, and now they're going into the promised land. Conceptually, that's how it's supposed to take place. Although we know that there's the 40 years or 38 years of wandering, but Bato and Wifal and Heiser all kind of, go in on this and their various works to kind of describe this. And so again, you have from the Euphrates up there in the far north down to this brook of Egypt. So it's this dividing line. You can see where there's Judah and Israel, and again, the original borders with what David had, and they're surrounded by water. And this is the ancient Near Eastern conceptions. And so we'll get into more of that. We'll see this here in the ancient Near Eastern conception. Here, this is the Babylonian world map. And Horowitz, has this described in his cosmic geography, where each one of these points are different points in the Babylonian worldview, and it's pretty much close. You have number 13 is Babylon, and that's where the center then of their world is. And they consider themselves in the center, almost in the center of the universe. And that out of them, kind of like out of Eden, life exudes. But you can see that they're surrounded again by these waters, okay? And so they had their worldview. This is their world. So it's surrounded by water. And this is the Babylonian context. And then you have, again, the Egyptians have the same thing. So when you discuss kingdoms of Egypt, and there's some discussion about that Egypt does not seem to have much concern for going too far to the north. They pretty much have divided everything up, and they're pretty happy with this is their world, and this is their reach, and they don't go beyond this reach, and they're not in the normal sense of trying to conquer what we would say the whole world. This is, what they viewed. Okay, so again, they saw it. This is how they saw it, and this is expressed here in the poetical stele of Pharaoh Thutmose III, and it's in which the god Ammon recounts the many nations or peoples that he's placed under the feet of the king Pharaoh, like the Mesopotamians and even the Greeks. The Egyptians then they believed that a river encircled the known earth. The nations listed are those with whom Thutmose interacted during his many military campaigns and commercial ventures. And this is taken from the Carter's New Century Handbook and Atlas of the Bible. Again, from the same source, we have the Greek view. Hectatus, the early geographer, produced a map as Greeks envisioned it. Now, no copies have survived, but other Greek writers describe it in detail, and it had a striking resemblance to the Babylonian and Egyptian conception of this same idea here in ancient cosmology, and they were surrounded by this ocean. So this is how they viewed it. Now we obviously, could try and go back through the dates and figure out dates for these kingdoms and nations and people groups and try to figure out, the various geographical and geological ages and try to compare and contrast and try to make this fit somehow. But I think going back to the first map that I showed you here, you can see the Israel point of view that they're surrounded by water, basically, or on one side of the eastern side, the Transjordan, if you include that, which originally, again, it's the Jordan is their boundary. But you can go with, that they're bounded on one side by the desert then, or the wilderness, So, but this, we could go too far in trying to find scientific data through confirmation bias that would try to allow us to understand these things. But what we're getting at is this is the literature, how the world was conceived in their literature, how they recorded it, and how they conceptually understood it. The most, the majority of the people reading these texts in which the writings are given and kept, the point of the record is basically you can see what they're drawing upon, a common element of how they described not only cosmology, but also their geography. And so it may not be exactly as the world is. There's no America, there's no China, there's no Australia, but this is how they viewed things. And again, they're not going too much out of this parameters. This is their known world. And they just believed it was surrounded by water. And they're not trying to be scientific. They're speaking of some ancient conceptions. Now, this is again a model off of the Mesopotamian cosmology from Horowitz, with number 1 being the upper heaven of Anu, number 2 the middle heaven of Igigi, Igigi, the gods. Baal, number 3, sits on a dais in a lapis blue shrine in number 3. Number 4, you have the lower heaven of the stars and constellations. Number 5, you have Shamash. 6, you have what's Sin, and 7, Shachar, the morning star. 8, Shalem, the evening star. 9, the sun's going forth. 10, the sun's coming in. 11, the upper earth, where the animated beings are. 12, the ocean, the great river. 13, finally, would be Middle Earth. Okay. The Apsu, the primeval waters, the waters below. Okay, so you got the waters below. And then you have 14, the realm of Ea or Inki, and 15, the lower earth, the land of no return. Rebellious Anuki gods imprisoned there. The dead eat clay and drink dust. So this is, again, the ancient cosmology that comes to us from Horowitz. And I'm taking this from the similar authors of the Sacred Bridge from Carta's Atlas of the Biblical World. Okay, and this is their second amended and enhanced edition. But they're pulling it from Horowitz. So you understand, again, that God's land is bounded on each side. And I first ran across some of this conceptually in Morales' work on Leviticus and who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord. And so using what I learned there, I wrote this in my dissertation, that Yahweh dwells in his tent, the tabernacle that is in the north, the Sphon, of which he created both north and south, according to Psalm 89:12. The north is where the waters flow from above, coming down from Hermon's heights, sourcing the Jordan River. And so in the north, we have Mount Hermon, which is actually the highest geographical mountain in the region of the biblical narrative. We believe that's where, some scholars believe that's where the Mount of Transfiguration took place. Going back to that region, a very popular region to blow up using the maps in the Sacred Bridge. This area, Mount Hermon, then is quite well known in Siphon, the region of Bashan, okay? And it's also where the Banias or Paneas is, near Tel Kadi, Tel Dan. And from this region, interestingly, we have the Litani River that goes, flows Mediterranean all the way into this area. And this red line going from Tyre to Banias is this road that Isaiah is talking about in chapter 9. So we have this idea of this way, and Jesus is going to come here and bring light into the darkness. And for the Greco-Roman world, Banias, Paneas is where they have these cave in this place to celebrate Caesar and the gods and worship. It's the headquarters for the pagan worship of the Greco-Roman world and the region. And of course, Mount Hermon depicts the same for the ancient Near Eastern, being the highest mountain. Although the Bible depicts, interestingly enough, Zion, Jerusalem, as the highest mountain cosmologically, we have this region here. Mount Hermon is geographically the highest mountain.